My joy to come to you once again with today's Heart of a Shepherd daily devotion. Our scripture reading today is First Chronicles chapter 14 and chapter 15. And I've titled this devotional, God is Just and He Rewards Faithfulness. Now, we are adding chapter 15 to our devotional today for the sake of consistency in the reading, bringing together the various events into one. Tomorrow will be First Chronicles chapter 16, but because chapter 14 was so brief, I wanted to join it with First Chronicles chapter 15. Now, another fact that you may recognize is that there is a parallel of earlier events that we have studied in this chapter that are like those found in 2 Samuel chapter 5. Now, I will take the liberty then to include 1 Chronicles 15 in today's study. By the way, it's a parallel to 2 Samuel chapter 6. Now, it's a word of reminder, for the Chronicles were written, it is believed, after the Babylonian captivity. Many scholars believe it was possibly written by Ezra, the writer of the book by that same name. Well, let's go and turn in our Bibles, 1 Chronicles 14, and you're going to find in the first 7 verses what I would describe as David's kingdom and family. Well, a little bit of the background. Now, David, having conquered and claimed Jerusalem as his capital city, built a palace within the city that reflected his reign as king. Now, we're given the names of the sons of David who were born in Jerusalem, as was the mention that the king also had daughters, though they are not named in this passage. Well, then I want you to consider David's adversaries defeated. Now, that's 1 Chronicles 14 and verse 8 through 17. Now, as we have noticed in 2 Samuel chapter 5, the Philistines were the first to test David as Israel's king. They were, the Philistines, soundly defeated by David and the army of Israel, not once, but twice. You'll find that recorded in verses 8 through 16. However, just as important as the battles were David's preparations to face his adversary. We read, and I quote, David inquired of God, saying, Shall I go up against the Philistines? And wilt thou deliver them into mine hand? And the Lord said unto David, Go up, for I will deliver them into thine hand. Chapter 14, verse 10. Well, when the king faced the Philistines a second time, we read in verse 14 that he inquired again of God. Now, interestingly, the Lord's strategy for the second battle with the Philistines was unlike the first. However, because David sought the Lord's will, God gave Israel the victory in verse 16. Now, a benefit of David's achievements was that he became an international figure in the ancient world. We read, the fame of David went out into all lands, and the Lord brought the fear of him upon all nations. Verse 17. Now let's go ahead and turn in our Bibles, 1 Chronicles chapter 15. Now, I would suggest to you in the 24 verses, chapter 15, verses 1 through 24, here we're given the method to convey the ark to Jerusalem. Now, as we have already seen, David's first attempt to bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem failed, and it ended in tragedy. Now, his failure to consult the Lord and his word regarding the method and means of transporting the ark had cost Uzzah, or Uzzah, some might would say, his life, chapter 13. Displeased, angry, frustrated, you might remember that David had complained to the Lord in chapter 13 and verse 12, and he asked, How shall I bring the ark of God home to me, that is, to Jerusalem? Now, notice then, in chapter 15 and verses 1 through 15, the place and the plan for transporting the ark. Well, David's second attempt to bring the ark to Jerusalem was a success. He had not only learned from his failure, but he sought God's mind and will. And therefore the king commanded the Levites to bring the ark to his capital, and he confessed in chapter 15 and verse 13, "For because ye," that is the Levites, "did it not in the first, the Lord our God made a breach," that is a sudden judgment, "upon us, for that we sought him," that is the Lord, "not after the due order." That is, he failed to seek the way of the Lord. Well, this time, the second time, rather than a cart, David commanded the Levites to bear the ark upon their shoulders, using gold gilded staves, literally poles, to carry it, even as Moses had commanded according to the word of the Lord. Now, notice then the personnel who were responsible for conveying the ark. Now, we're given here in chapter 15 an important registry of the Levite families that is recorded. Now, consider especially in chapter 15 and verse 16 through 24 the vital role of singers and musicians in worship. Now, various classes of musicians were named, including the principal composers, Heman, the son of Joel, and of his brethren Asaph, the son of Berechiah, I believe that is, and the sons of Moriah, their brethren, and then finally Ethan, the son of Cushaiah. Now, notice also that the musicians were from the tribe of Levi. Now, the Lord had set apart the Levites to serve him, and there were some, especially some families, who were skilled in singing and various instruments that were employed in worship. Now, here we have mentioned cymbals of brass, psalteries, that is, lutes, harps, trumpets, all accompanied the choirs that lifted their voices in singing the psalms. Also, we find mentioned in the midst were doorkeepers who really acted as guards and gatekeepers, verses 23 through 24. Well, a celebration of the ark's arrival is recorded in chapter 15 and verse 25 through 29. Now, we find then a celebration then greeted the arrival of the ark in Jerusalem. Then the Levites offered 7 bullocks and 7 rams as sacrifices of praise to the Lord. Dressed appropriately for the occasion, the Levites wore robes of linen, and we also read that David, the king, draped himself in the same. That is, the king set aside his royal robes, and he wore a simple ephod of linen. Well, the arrival of the ark in the capital city of Jerusalem was a cause for great celebration, and David was ecstatic with joy. Now, as we close, tragically, 1 Chronicles 15 concludes with a foreboding of sorrow. David's first wife, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looking out a window, saw King David dancing and playing, and we read, and she despised him in her heart. Literally, verse 29, she had contempt for David, her husband. Well, 2 Samuel chapter 6 and verse 15 through 19 will amplify Michal's spirit toward her husband, the king, in our future devotional. I want to close by considering that moment. As the day of celebration ended, David walked into his palace, and we read in chapter 15 and verse 27 of 1 Chronicles, he was still wearing the fine linen robe. His heart was filled with joy. But rather than delight in her husband's triumph, Michal, the daughter of Saul, despised and condemned David, as we will read in 2 Samuel 6 and verse 20. David answered her contempt unashamedly, identified himself as the man whom God had chosen to rule his people. And tragically, we will read about God's judgment. For Michal will go to her grave childless, for she had no child until the day of her death. Well, I want to close on a personal note. When I look back on decades of ministry, I cannot remember when an adversary did not threaten a moment of triumph and rejoicing. You know, I have learned that someone will always be ready to steal my joy and dampen my enthusiasm to serve the Lord. And my friend, I would encourage you to realize that you will not be the exception. Here's a challenge. When an adversary threatens your joy, remember that God is just and He rewards faithfulness and punishes sin. May the Lord find us faithful. God bless you. Thank you for being a part of this daily devotional from this Heart of a Shepherd. God bless you and bye-bye.